It used to be that you could only buy gongs and other instruments at legitimate music stores. But nowadays, you can find them everywhere. So how do you decide if something is a real instrument or not, if it's worth buying? That's what we're going to explore today on It's Cuppa Time. I get this question a lot via email or on Facebook or some sort of messaging service, and it's, buying gongs. People have a lot of similar questions, so we're going to try to address those. So before we really get into, picking gongs, I think we need to learn a little bit about gongs and what to look for. Now back 40, 50 years ago, there wasn't that much selection. There was Paiste gongs, which were imported by Ludwig, who was the Paiste distributor, and then in the 70s, Rogers Drums took over. And then after that, Paiste put together their own distributorship based out of Brea, California. So there was Paiste gongs, and then a few other gongs that you could get from a few sources. Carroll Sound in New York, maybe some of the bigger drum shops on the West Coast. It was just, there wasn't a lot of availability of gongs. But now you can find them everywhere. I see them in all types of places. Target, I've seen gongs at Target. You can buy gongs at like Pier 1 and different import sort of places, World Market and all that. So you can find gongs everywhere. So what do you look for in a gong? I think that's really, before you ask, what type should I get, things like that, it's like, what do you look for? How do you buy a gong? Naturally, the most important thing would be if you could pick a gong in person, if you could find a drum shop or some sort of place that would have a great selection of gongs that you could go in and audition, listen to, and hopefully somebody there would be knowledgeable and they could help guide you. Places like the Memphis Gong Chamber, Andy's Music in Chicago, a few places like that. And, hopefully teach you some about the gongs that they have and what to look for. But it's hard for everybody to travel to those places, and a lot of people end up buying things online. And there's a lot of great online distributors like Gongs Unlimited in Nebraska, the Gong Shop out in San Francisco, and a few other places. And they have very knowledgeable people. And Steve Weiss Music in Philadelphia too. They're big importers of gongs, and the people are knowledgeable there. So you can always ask them questions and get a lot of good advice there. But let's just look at some gongs. I got a selection of 7 to 7.5 inch gongs here that are kind of representative of typical gongs. And I picked them all the same size because they were easy to show on camera and easy to talk about. And they all have different construction, things to look for. Okay, the first one I'm going to show is this one. This is about a 7-inch small chow type gong. And, doesn't have the best sound. It's kind of short and muffled. But this is a good example of what I would call a tourist gong. This is something made for people to buy at a tourist shop or something, and usually it'll come on some sort of nice little bamboo or wooden stand, and you put it on your mantle or your desk or something, and it's nice for looks. And that's basically what it is. It's a tourist gong. So let's examine it closer. First thing I want to do, let's just look at the front. Okay. Now let's look at the back. The back is a real telltale. There's nothing done to the back. It's completely smooth. And you can't see any hammer marks. So this gong has most likely been stamped out in a press from a piece of sheet metal, probably brass, and that's why the sound is not as rich as it should be. And it's amazing what these companies can do. Now, like cymbal companies, they can take a disc of bronze and they can use like a cookie cutter stamp, and they can stamp out a complete cymbal with fake lathing lines, fake hammering marks and all, and it looks like, wow, this is a great cymbal, but it's just been stamped out of a piece of sheet metal in one process. So looking at that, especially if you don't know much about cymbals or that, you might think, wow, this is great, look at it, it's all lathed and hammered and all this. But no, not necessarily. So a lot of the inexpensive cymbals, student cymbals, are machine stamped in one process. Ka-chunk, next blank comes in, ka-chunk, there goes the cymbal. And that's why they're inexpensive, because there's no handwork. And some of them are even just made on a computer-controlled machine, and there's nobody involved in the manufacture. So they can do anything. So like this one, this has most likely been stamped out of a piece of sheet metal. You can see there are no hammer marks. There's little crimping marks around the edge here, but those don't really look like hammer marks. I would suspect, there we get a view of that, there you can see them. I would suspect those have been stamped in. And if we look at the edge, it's not really a crumpled edge. It just looks more like it was folded over. Kind of hard to see. So that's, one thing to look for is look at the back of every gong. And you'll be able to tell, just a basic tourist gong from something that somebody actually wielded a hammer on. And if we go at the front here, now typically on a chow gong, it comes out of the oven with a dark crust on it, and then they put it on a big lathe, and they use a lathe to clear off the middle of the chow gong. Now this one, if we look, all the little concentric lathing lines, they look too perfect. I mean, this really looks like it was. I had to get a view of those, like it was stamped out, fake lathing lines. And this is again what I would call a tourist gong. You can find these in small chow type gongs, even to some larger ones, often in a bossed gong too. You could find something like this. But that sound, I mean, it's just, there's nothing there. It's very lightweight. Like I said, it's probably just sheet brass. And there you go. Things to look for. Now, let's move up. This is a made in Wuhan. And you hear Wuhan as again, sort of a buzzword in buying gongs. It's a Wuhan Chinese gong. Well, Wuhan is a province. Like here in the U.S., we would have states. Like I live in Wisconsin. Okay, Wuhan is like a state in China. And there are a number of gong and cymbal factories located in Wuhan. So, but there are some made in some other provinces. Because, of course, China has a very long history of making gongs and cymbals. So just because it says Wuhan on it doesn't mean a thing. Doesn't mean it's any better or worse than any other gong. And if you are a big enough store or company, you can buy a large volume of gongs from a Chinese factory, and they will silkscreen your company name on it, whatever you want on it, Bob's Gongs, you can get whatever you want put on there. But again, don't be caught up in buzzwords like Wuhan, okay? Same thing too, Tibet. We see that on so many things. I'm on eBay all the time, and I will have an eBay special video coming up shortly about things on eBay. And I'm just going to go on there and explore things and talk about how to buy on eBay and what to look for. But, you know, all these buzzwords like Tibet, everything's made in Tibet today, right? Because it's the buzzword. Wuhan, things like that. So the big thing would be the sound. But first, let's examine this one. And if you look at it, you can see there are actual hammer marks on this, on the front. But let's go to the back. I have a little muffle pad on there, so you have to ignore that. If we look at the back, you can see these prominent little light spots showing up on the dark. Those are hammer marks. So this actually has been hammered. This is also like twice as thick. We can kind of get a look, you can see. I mean, this is a piece of sheet metal. This is a piece of cast bronze. It's about twice as thick, easily weighs twice as much as this cheaper gong. You can see the hammer marks. You can see this is actually lathed. The center is actually lathed in the metal because it's uneven. You know, especially if you look at the edge here, it's not a perfect circle around the black. You can see the same thing on the back too. So there's actually been work done on this. This could have been pressed out when it was a hot ingot, you know, a hot disc. They might have used a hydraulic press to shape it. It's hard to tell if this has been like that or if it was hand hammered. I suspect this one was pressed. And if we look at the edge too, look at how uneven that edge is. You can see it's going up and down. So this is handmade, where if we again go back to this one, look at the edge on this. It is just like perfectly flat and perfectly round. So this was all just machine done. So this has some craftsmanship in it. It'll be a little muffled because of that pad, but you can hear that sound. A lot of richness there. Let's go back to the other one, just for comparison. I mean, there's really no sound there. I just keep that one hung on my closet door in my office just as a decoration. But a nice solid sound, a lot of sustain. So this is an actual made in China by people with hammers and fire and tongs sort of gong. Here's another chow gong made in a different factory. This one is actually a little, I guess you could say a little nicer. This one's got kind of a roughness to it, where this one is a little nicer, more precise, you could say. And again, if you look at it, you can see these are actual lathing lines in there. And it does look like it was hammered. Again, it's hard to tell on some of these small gongs. I would suspect this was pressed to shape in a hydraulic press, which I have nothing against gongs being made that way, especially these small ones. It's so much easier to just take the, you know, the fire hot glowing metal and press it out to shape, to form the edge. But let's listen to this one. It's got some harmonics in there. It's got a lot of sustain. It's got a musical tone. Again, we'll go back to the cheapy gong here, the tourist gong. Oh yeah, if I overplay it, it's just kind of, it just doesn't go. So all of this you can apply to larger gongs. You know, if you're looking at a 20-inch, a 30-inch, a 50-inch Chinese gong, or any sort of gong, you can apply the same things. The thing you we'll find on the bigger gongs, it's easier to see hammer marks and things like that often because there are more of them, and it's just much easier to see. Okay, here's a small gong. Now, many Chinese gongs are played handheld like this, or many Asian gongs, I should say. So this has no holes drilled into it, but we can see where the center was scraped, hand scraped, to scrape the lines in it. Same thing on the back. There we go. And we can see where this one was actually lathed, and you can see how it's sort of uneven on there. Again, this one might have been stamped, although it could have been hammered too. But here's a small. Now, something like this would often be played with a flat stick and muffled with the hand behind it. Different than the handle on here, but like a flat stick that is often used. So here's a small gong, and again, this weighs substantial. It's bronze. Now here's a small paiste gong, little paiste accent or deco gong, and this is made out of sheet metal, but you can actually see where the edge was hammered. This is hammered out. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can see the hammer marks, and you can see the lathing lines in here. It doesn't look as fake as the tourist gong. And this will have a sort of a lighter sound because this is nickel silver, sheet nickel silver, compared to the bronze chow types and that. But again, a rich sound. Sustain, overtones. It's very musical. Let's go back to our tourist gong. There's nothing there. So again, this is brass. It could even be steel or something. I mean, it's just sheet metal. It actually sounds more like a serving tray than a gong compared to these others. And those, the Wuhan and that one have the same pitch. So that's one thing to look at when buying gongs, and especially looking at pictures of gongs, like on eBay or Reverb or whatever internet site, a dealer or that, is if you have a picture of the actual gong, is looking at it, looking for handwork, looking for things not being exact, because when you work with hands, especially on this small scale, it's hard to get things exact, and not looking like it was just done by a machine. So that's important. Those are the best things you can do besides the sound. I mean, that's always the thing, is to play something and listen to the sound. And for me, it comes down to, does the sound work for what I want to do? I've played thousands and thousands of gongs in my life, and I like most of them, but a lot of them I wouldn't buy because I have no use for the type of sound they have. I mean, I could even find this would work in certain improv situations that I play in, because the criteria for sound is totally different there. So I could use, something like this in an improv situation. But a big thing you want to look for, like here's this paiste gong here, big hammer marks. I mean, you can see these are actually hammered in, especially if you look at the back where it's been hammered, you can see how the metal's been stressed, and you can see each mark, each hammer stroke is different. That's a big thing, to look for. Okay, let's talk about bells now. Bells, a lot of the same sort of thing with bells. Let me move these out of the way here. Get my bells. And also with gongs and bowls and everything, a lot of people talk about the patina. I've written about this in the Way of the Gong blog, and I've written about this on Facebook and other places. People say, well, it looks old. It has this really old, funky patina, and patina can be faked. And they do that a lot today because, especially with singing bowls, because of the popularity of them, and that they can say, this is a very old, ancient bowl, and they can get a lot more money for it when it was probably made last week or a month ago. They can fake patina with different acids and chemical compounds. So it used to be, if something had a deep patina, you knew it was old. Nowadays, not so much. So same thing if you're buying older gongs, what does it look like? Some people like to keep them super clean and use all sorts of cleaners and polishes and all that. Other people just let them go and age gracefully. A lot of times you can tell, if somebody's saying this is an old gong, well, does it really look old? And if it looks old, is this actual patina and stuff? So let's look at bells. I have 3 different drobu or ganta type bells here. And we can look at a few things that you can look for. Now here's the first one. Let's get a close-up on this. If you look at it, the construction on this is pretty rough. The details, let's get the little details on here. If you look at it, this is not a well-made gong. If we look at the inside gong, this is not a well-made bell. And it has, it has an okay sound. But if we look at the details, there really aren't many details in here. It's just kind of poorly cast, and there's not a lot of details. Especially like if you look up here, so we can get a good view of this. This edge here, and nothing is really symmetrical. It just looks like a kind of a cheap cast bell. Now again, you might like the sound, find this sound usable. So there's nothing wrong with buying, sort of cheaper instruments if it does something for what you're doing. But that's sort of an example of that. Now here's another one. If we look at this, look at the detail on that. Much finer details. Look at the top here. Looks more symmetrical. This is a much better casting on this one. Much more detail. It's a higher quality bell. Even on the inside, it's a much higher quality bell as far as the details, but listening to the sound, it's okay. It doesn't have a really vibrant sound. We got both of these here. This one actually has a better sound. This one's kind of dead. So, you really got to look at how they're constructed, and especially the details. Now this one looks really old, and it might be. I have no idea. I can't even remember where I got this one. But it really does have a deep patina to it. It could be old, but it doesn't have a very good sound. So in this case, even if this one was 50, 60, 100 years old, it's not a great bell. I wouldn't make a big deal out of it. Okay, here's another one. Let's take a close look at the details on this. Really nice casting. Really nice work. And there's a lot of detail. You can see like the face here is very detailed. All of these little decorations on there are very highly detailed. Now this one, the inner part is lathed. This is actually a very recent Meinl bell. Meinl has their whole sonic energy program, and they have a couple sizes of Drobu bells, and they have them made for them over in Asia, but you know, they have a lot of quality control. So it's a high quality bell. Got a little richer sound here. I actually have 2 or 3 of these Meinl bells because they're really nice bells for a modern bell. So you can buy these and you know you're going to get a quality bell with a good sound. And like these bells are all, the better bells are 2 pieces where the handle will come off. This is cast separately, and the bell is cast separately, and then it just screws on. I have some bells that are just kind of, where the handle's just kind of forced on, wedged on, you know, different types of construction. But the better Drobu or Ganta bells usually have a 2-piece with the handle and the bell separate. Again, if somebody says it's old, you want to look at the wear on it. You can tell if something was highly detailed at one time. The thing to look for is at the top, where people are holding it, is wear. Over time, the details in the metal will be rubbed off, and it might develop a darker patina from the finger oils holding it there. So here's a good example of that. This is a Japanese bell. This is a kokore. And you can see on this handle, it's very dark and it's very smooth. So that leads me to believe that this was actually used a lot. I mean, you can just feel it. It's just smooth, just like antiques, you know, you can, or a good example is like the knob at the end of a stair railing, where everybody comes downstairs and they put their hand on the knob, you know, especially like a brass one at a museum or something. Usually it's worn super smooth and it's darkly patinaed because everybody has touched that and you can tell. So this one has a nice real dark patina on the handle and has a nice patina on the bell itself. It's a little thicker bell, a little more solid sound than the Drobu. But here's the real important thing. If we look inside, this has a lead clapper, which is something you don't find nowadays because of lead and lead poisoning and all. But the thing to notice, if you look at the clapper here, there's a little indent going all the way around it. That's from the clapper striking this edge of the bell. I'm trying to get right up in there so you can see that. So this tells me this bell has been played a lot. Even though lead is a soft metal and will dent easily, this has been played a lot. Also, this edge here, right inside the bell, is very, very smooth. So they've both been worn smooth by being used a lot. So this one, I can't remember how old it's supposed to be, but this one is fairly old, and the big thing, it's been used a lot. So things like that, you know, any sort of a wear in a bell around, especially where the clanger, the clapper is striking the bell, either wear to the clapper or wear to the bell itself. Those are things to look for if you want to be sure it's sort of an antique or old or however it is being described. Other bells, let's look at Burma bells. I have all types of Burma bells. And let's see, I'll take this one here. Okay. I've got a lot of different Burma Bells, and again, you see on eBay, antique, old, ancient, things like that. Not always, because again, you could take a modern one and forge some sort of patina on it. But things to watch for are, the patina. Let's look at this one. This is one I got from somebody who got over in Thailand during the Vietnam War or so, like 50 years ago. And they said a farmer found it in his field. And their description was it could be hundreds of years old, which you have to take that with a grain of salt. There's no proof of it being that. But I do have provenance on a lot of the instruments that I do buy from the people who had them. And you have to take them for their word that, if this, let's just say they got this in 1970, well, then it's 50 years old, at least. Before that time, how old it is, we don't know. But this one has quite a patina. I used a little Dawn dish soap and water to clean it off, but I don't really want to get in there with any sort of bronze or brass cleaners and clean it off, because I sort of like the historical look of it. But this is an older one with a lot of patina, and I could believe this was underground for who knows how many years in some farmer's field because of the way it looks. Here's another one that I got. Now this one, I have provenance that this is well over 100 years old. Doesn't look it. I mean, it doesn't look anywhere near this. This I got from a woman who had this in her family. It was her great-grandfather was a world traveler and got this in the late 1800s over in Asia. And so this is probably well over 100 years old, and it doesn't really look it. And again, all I did was a little soap and water to clean it up. But as with all the instruments I have, to me, the real important thing is the sound. What is the sound like? Do I like the sound? Can the sound work for me? All right, here's a modern one. This is from Ufip in Italy. And their Burma Bells are sand cast. If I get it closer, you can see it as a very rough exterior because of the sand casting, where these others, like this, they cast them often in sand casting or lost wax casting, some sort of way like that, but then they will scrape and file them down to make them look nice and shiny. And you can even see across this one all the file marks on it. So the Ufip ones are sand cast. They make a mold and they cast them, and you get that real grainy finish. You can't even hear it as I rub it. And I have 3 different Ufips, actually 4 different ones. And again, I really like the sound and how they're made and how they're finished. I kind of like the cool casting look here because they look different than my other Burma Bells. Here's a bigger Ufip one. And again, if you look at it, that surface is real grainy. I mean, it looks like sand, and you can tell. And they, filed off the edges after they took it out of the mold, cleaned it up. You can even see, here's a little pock mark here where the metal, You know, there was a little bump in the mold or something. So part of that is, you know, you're looking at for hand work on things, on instruments, to tell you that it was made. Okay, here's a modern one, and it actually, I got a set of 3 of these in 2019 at the Gong Summit. These are, if you can see it on there, Steve Weiss music is engraved on there. These are modern American-made bells for Steve Weiss. Apparently they're made by the Malmark Handbell Factory. Makes some of the better handbells like you would see in churches. So they know how to make high quality bronze. But this is polished to a nice mirror finish, which mine is all fingerprinted and that. I wanted to get a nice patina, so I haven't really cleaned it up. But these are some of the better sounding Burma Bells that I have found, the Steve Weiss brand ones. They make 3 of them. And the big one, which I have with my setup, it probably weighs 6 pounds and just has this amazing big sound to it. And that's about, I don't know, 10 inches or so. So here we go, very modern bells. You know, everybody talks about the older stuff is better. I see this a lot on different forums and groups, and everybody is like, oh, the older gongs, the older bells, they're so much better, they're made better, sound better, blah, 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 blah. It can be true, but it's not necessarily true. I mean, the sound of this is fantastic. And this is 2 years old. So don't always get caught up in older instruments sound better, made better, or whatever, because a lot of the new stuff is fantastic. And I've played things that just came out of the factory and thought they were amazing, all sorts of different instruments. So just because it's old doesn't mean it sounds better. That's real important to remember. Let's talk about singing bowls now. Everything I've said so far also holds true for singing bowls. Singing bowls are so popular nowadays, and again, you have to watch out when you're buying them for terms like Tibet, antique, ancient, all sorts of stuff like that, because most likely they're not any of those. And patina, again, because of the popularity of purported old singing bowls, a lot of makers or sellers are putting a fake patina on the bowls to make them look much older so they can sell them for much higher prices. And a lot of times it's really hard to spot the fake patina and to know if it's really old or not. Again, a big thing is to look for wear. Older bowls that have been handled a lot by people, and they're, you know, handled, should have some wear. And that's always a good sign, but you can't always find that. But let's look at some different bowls here. Here's an older singing bowl I have. And you can see it's got some of the little decorative circles inside, around the top edge here. And you can see this is, it's not even, it's not all precise. This is actually hand hammered. This is a hammered bowl. And you can just tell, you could see the hammer strokes in here, the hammer marks. This has got a nice patina. Again, I haven't polished this. This is probably one of the first singing bowls I got ages ago. And I I just wanted to keep getting the patina, but we can hear this. It's got a very nice sound, a lot of harmonics, very solid tone. It's also very thick. If you can look at the edge here, it's fairly thick. So when you're on eBay looking at stuff, look at how thick the bowl is. I buy a lot of stuff on eBay, and I kind of know how it's going to sound because I have a chart of all of my bowls, and I have the size, both in inches and centimeters, because stuff on eBay is usually in centimeters. I also have the weight in both ounces and grams, because again, often things from Asia are weighed in grams. And I also have the pitch or note of the bowl, so that I can tell by the size of a bowl and how heavy it is, I can get an idea of where the pitch will be. So here is, this one's fairly thick. It's got a very solid sound. I'm going to take one here. This is a little bigger bowl. And again, you can see it's been hammered. There are hammer marks on it. But if we look at it, let's compare. Much thinner. Look at the edges there. Much thinner bowl. So this won't have as solid a sound, and it's lower in pitch. Compared to the sound of the heavier one. You can hear a much higher fundamental in there. I mean, they're a little bit bigger, probably like 8.5 inches. It's a little bigger, but you can just hear it's more of a clang. It's more of a thin tone because it has thinner walls. It's a much thinner bowl. Actually, it's bigger, but it weighs much less than the smaller bowl, which has so much more metal to it. So those are things to look for. So if you see a bowl and it's very thin-walled, you'll know that it will have a lower pitch, and it might not have a very solid sound with a mallet. It could sound okay with a wand. But you can hear that, a very low tone. So things to watch for is that. Here's another thin-walled bowl. This is about a 6-inch. It's got a nice sound, but it's not a very solid, long-lasting tone. It's thin, a little more boing in there, because it's a very thin bowl. Again, we'll compare the edges here. So that's something to look for when you're buying bowls and just, trying them out, is how they are. Let's look at some others that are my favorite, which are Japanese rin bowls. These are made in two different ways. Here's one way, and we can see there are no hammer marks on this. It's completely smooth, other than the rings on the bottom here. That's because these are pressed out. They will have a little sheet disc of bronze or brass. They put it on, clamp it into like a lathe type thing, and then there's this tool that they use that they spin it around and they press it against it and it forms it over. You can find videos of that on YouTube of people making these. Now, just because it's made that way, it's pressed into shape as opposed to hammered into shape, doesn't mean it's any less of an instrument or any less of a sound. These have really great sounds. I actually prefer the rin bowls because they tend to have less harmonics than the singing bowls. And they have a really great sound. And these come in all kinds of different sizes. Like here's a real small one. Here's a little harder mallet. But this is fairly thick. This is probably actually a little thicker than that first singing bowl, if you check the edges there. So again, if you're looking on eBay and you see a bowl and it has thick walls, you know it'll probably have a more solid sound and it will be higher in pitch than the same or close to the same size that would have very thin walls. Okay, so this is the pressed out type of rin bowl. Now here's the hammered type here. See all the hammering. This is two-piece. You can actually see it's like a seam running all the way around it. Two pieces of metal joined, and then this is hammered. And this is a very thick edge, but there's a little, it's hard to see, but there's a little lip here on the inner edge. So if you just go by the edge, it looks very, very thick, but the bowl is actually not quite as thick as the edge because there's a little lip there. But these have a great sound too. This is a heavy little bowl, very solid. Nice sound. Now here's a similar one. We can see hammer marks. Very similar looking. They have the smooth upper edge. And this one doesn't have a very prominent lip like this one. This one is also, it's bigger, but it's much lighter in weight. This is what I would call more kind of a tourist rin bowl. And you can hear that. It doesn't have that solid pitched sound. Doesn't last as long. Let's compare it to this one. They have very different sound. Just not as rich. So this is more of a tourist type rin bowl. Although it still has a nice sound, a usable sound, and I do use this one. So again, it's what sounds are you hearing? What sounds do you like? What fits your ear? Here's a couple more rins just to give you very solid, very long sustain, fairly heavy bronze bowl, and this is about 5 inches in diameter. So here's a bigger one. It's got some dents in it from over the years. It does have the hammering. It's got a slight lip on it, so it's not as thick as it looks. This one's actually fairly thin. But it has a real nice tone. So even though this is a thinner walled one, it still has a really nice long-lasting tone to it. And it's fairly focused as opposed to the smaller one here. Still a good sound, but then this real heavy one, very focused pitch, very long tone. And I do have some bigger rins, bigger than this, that are fairly heavy and have a really nice long tone. Okay, so here's that thin wall singing bowl, just again, here's a thin sound. Doesn't have that real predominant high note to it. Okay, here's a bowl. And we see a lot of these nowadays with this etching on them. Hard to get a good look on it. When this one has all the etching outside, and inside we have a Buddha. You can see that there. I heard with the light. There's a Buddha in there. And again, this is real popular now to have bowls with all the fancy etching, or we even see gongs that are purported to be Tibetan gongs with all this etching on it. This is a modern invention. You wouldn't find any old bowls with any sort of etching unless somebody had taken an old bowl and done that to it. But this is a modern thing. It's kind of a touristy, new age sort of thing. I mean, to put the Buddha on it, or the Buddha's eyes, and auspicious symbols and things on it to make it look sort of more officially Buddhist or Tibetan as a selling point. Ooh, this has the Buddha in it. This is a special bowl, I didn't buy this for any of the decoration, other than, yeah, it looks nice, it's kind of cool, but I like the sound of it. It's got a nice sound. It's got a nice sound with a wand, too. I mean, again, my main criteria when I buy anything is how does it sound? And can I use that sound in what I do, whether it's playing a meditation session or if it's playing an improvised music concert or even a composed music concert, is does it work? So as I said, this sort of etching is a recent thing on bowls and gongs, but don't let that scare you away from it. I mean, try them out. If you like the sound, go for it. But if it says it's a 500-year-old bowl and it looks like this, it's most certainly not 500 years. It might be 5 or 10 years, but not 500.